What you said was so important. People invest so much money into the marketing.
You do need to make sure certain things are done in certain ways.
What are people saying about you as a company and you as a person when you're not in the room?
Some people just don't think about it. One of our members of staff in Manchester used to ring one of our students at 8:30 every morning to wake her up for university because she promised her mum that she wouldn't let her miss university.
I love that.
Getting the right people actually that having those interactions on a day-to-day basis.
I couldn't agree more.
Trying not to fall into the list of the war of amenities because that's the way that America has gone.
Let's make people impressed.
This is how it feels to live in a Dandara Living property. Actually, it's better than I thought, rather than it's worse than I thought, or oh, it's exactly like I thought.
If you could reinvent one thing about real estate, what would it be?
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
We are reinventing real estate. We are super excited to be joined by Paul Borrmann here from Dandara Living. He's had a particularly interesting journey from the living sectors to becoming a managing director of Dandara, and we are very, very excited to jump in to his shoes and walk that journey with him up to this point now. So we'd love to hear from your perspective what attracted you to the property industry in the first place and how you built bricks from there.
In honesty, I was at university at Leeds and studied teaching. I enjoyed sport. I thought I'll be a PE teacher. But I guess the honest truth is I had two friends that were doing different things. One of them was doing recruitment. The other one was doing property. And I was weighing up which one looked more fun and which one had better career opportunities. So I chose property and it chose me. I interviewed for a high street lettings and sales agency, a single branch in Leeds, got that job and that was on with the journey 16 years ago. Everything that you can do within the property sphere was done within those four walls, which is great because I didn't know how to do any of it. And then you learn kind of very quickly what you don't know and then work through and try and get better at each of the pieces. So that was my introduction to it.
And do you think those really early on formative years with that lettings experience helped you now when you're forming the opinion for customers and tenants and how you want them to interact with the building? Do you think that gave you really good insight into that?
So I think, again, having to do everything, I still think now in an MD role, there's things that I do and actions that I perform that go straight back to 16 years ago, sitting in that chair, not knowing but learning the ropes. So I'm sure it really, really annoys the guys in our business that I've done all their roles throughout my career. So it's quite hard to pull the wool over somebody's eyes if they've actually done that job. So that grounding early doors of doing everything, because you can get into lettings and you can just be the viewer going out of the office and doing the viewings and blink in 5 years, you've not learned anything apart from how to sell. So the blended of, like I say, kind of block estate management, property management, lettings and everything in between is a foundation really, just on a bigger scale of what we're doing at Dandara Living. The biggest difference between then and now is the unrivaled approach to customer experience and customer service, lessons that I learned, mistakes that I made. That all comes into the day-to-day that we do at Dandara Living. And it helps keep me grounded as well, a little bit.
Would you say that going from where you were into this leadership role, would that be advice that you would give someone looking to also climb the ranks, really get involved in all aspects of the business, learn the business inside out, and then progress? What would be your pieces of advice?
The key bit, rather than being, I'd say I was an expert in my 20s, but learning the component parts of how a business works is the biggest part. So I don't think they thanked me, but we had our customer experience director and our head of operations through a conversation with them. We discussed that they were new to the business. Although they knew how build to rent worked, they perhaps didn't know how this business worked. So fast forward a 7 a.m. through 7 p.m. shift later and 12 hours working front desk, I think they had a better idea of how the business works and they could appreciate perhaps some of the ideas that we were having would have gone against effectively what happened on the ground or had a different impact to what they perhaps would have thought. The key to leadership in my mind is understanding how the business actually works, because then you can come from a position of intelligence and power in that situation. And then leadership is getting people to follow you. So people are more likely to follow you if you have empathy and if you understand their situations, you understand their challenges, and then you can work with them to get past them. So that's something I'm very conscious of and engineer that out as much as possible.
In terms of, I suppose, your journey to now, like honing in a bit on those milestones, 'cause it's really important, especially when speaking to kind of younger people getting in the industry, that you're still incredibly young and you've got to an amazing position, but for people to understand that it's not overnight. Where were those key milestones that you felt like you were taking that next step in your career?
The undercurrent to it all is I'm just quite a normal person, actually. And common sense goes quite a long way in asking why without having a preconceived idea. So obviously I've never really actively looked for a job. I've been tapped on the shoulder a number of times. So you'll have to ask the people that have hired me as to why they thought I was good for the role and hopefully why I did okay for them. Again, going back to the part where it's hard work. I'm 37 now. In my mind, it's been a long, long time to get to this point. It's the longest, shortest time, really. So although it seems like it was yesterday, and it also seems to have taken forever because you have to put the graft in, you have to work hard. Invisible reputation is something that I obsess on. So what do people say about you? And it transforms into the brand as well. So what are people talking about Paul Borrmann and effectively Dandara Living when I'm not in the room or when we're not in the room? That's a really interesting thing because you can't influence it. It's interactions that you have through your life. My view on any advice to people going through it is as long as you're working hard and you can, at the end of the day, value what your input is, that's all that matters. So I'd say work hard and then just really put the commitment in. Be useful, solve problems, come up with solutions, be open, be honest, and don't have any preconceived ideas because the amount of people that I've seen that they know but don't ask the questions to understand what happens before that process or what happens after that process. So then they're annoying that team. That hurts your invisible reputation. Whereas you're working with everybody in a process, everyone comes out of it, hopefully, after a bit of change management thinking, oh, that was pretty good. And we've worked through that together. And again, that reputation builds on that. So in a roundabout way, there's no one way to do it. I've had right time, right place, I'm sure, in my career. But also I've built the foundations by being quite a nice, normal person that doesn't use 10 words when I can use one. Learning bigger words the older I get, which is fantastic. But that isn't where I start. I start with let's be open and honest and transparent. Whether that be with investors, whether that be our customer strategy, and whether that be with the staff.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take for people looking to start their careers is almost give yourself the freedom not to have such an expansive plan and just be the best that you can be in the roles that you've got and the next role will come. That's actually a really unique piece of advice to people because a lot of the time everything's very future focused. What am I doing today that's going to affect me in 5 years' time? Where's my growth trajectory here? What you're saying is almost you can't predict any of that and not to get bogged down by all of that and actually just to say, if I can be the best I can be today and tomorrow and be a good person and create meaningful relationships along the way, then the rest will look after itself.
What were the initial lessons that you learned, one from going from agency side to client side, but also obviously going into what is now one of the most established institutional landlords?
The truth of that move is me and Sarah, my partner, were living in Leeds. She won't thank me, but she used to cry every time we drove home from her parents. It was only an hour away. They lived in Appleton. So we said, let's move to the northwest. So Sarah, who's the driven one actually out of us two, she had a job with Unilever. She had to have accepted it. I start in 8 weeks. So you come into the northwest with me. So I was saying, crikey, I need to think about it. I'm quite a laid back person. Probably didn't hand my notice in soon enough because it's awkward, isn't it? So I found a job, but I was commuting from Chester back to Leeds for 3 or 4 weeks just to finish off my notice with that job. It wasn't ideal. So didn't look to leave. I was happy doing what I was doing. It was just because that agency wasn't in the northwest and I was moving. So I had 2 interviews, one for Grainger and one for Philip James, which is a big agency in Manchester and surrounding areas. I was head of property management with Philip James and head of Northern lettings and built to rent for Grainger. And I guess that was a crossroads. Is it property management or is it kind of the lettings kind of side that I would go? Rob Cuff, who interviewed me at Philip James, still very good friends with him, even though I didn't take that job. I've worked with him subsequently on lots of different things. I do joke with him, I'm probably the best hire he never hired because I introduced him to the Grainger stock. I've used him since. And then it was really just interviewing with Grainger before really knowing what build to rent and institutional was. Because when you come out of agency, you're a little bit, unless you're a Savills, unless you're an institutional type agency, you're probably a little bit blinkered from that world. But that step from agency into institutional, when I'd made it and when I understood it, was probably the best thing in my career, actually, because you can control so much more, especially at Grainger when they really got behind the customer experience, customer journey, asset management, and you can control it. We all know in agency, as a property manager or lettings management, you're only as good as that landlord lets you be, and you can work within your parameters. So when you can control the whole end-to-end process, so much scope to make things better. And then back then, Granger was very London-centric. There wasn't really anything outside London. So I took the North patch, which is anything north of London, which was good, and set it up. I had probably more flexibility than the Southern guys to get on with stuff and make it good. I honed my skill set there, and then whipped for an institutional. And I've got, again, no qualms in saying it. The fact that I worked for Granger has probably helped me in my career because it's a big name. And I do feel sorry for them because they were first mover in that space. And what normally comes with that is people pillaging the company. And it's not to say they've got high staff turnover, but they're a really good company and they train really well. So, of course, you would get into that situation, which is similar to where we are now. So at Dandara Living, it's fantastic when we win an award, but the downside is it's just a target on the back for the recruiters. And we've had some interesting stories with recruiters. Some of them are great, some of them are probably a little bit trickier to deal with, let's say. But the challenge is, how do we keep our good people? And that's my job and the senior team's job to keep them motivated and coming to work for us.
Absolutely. And we're going to touch on this a bit more later, but I do just want to spend a minute on it because what you said was so important about that invisible brand piece. And people invest so much money into the marketing of your assets, your brand, that invisible brand, and the idea that what are people saying about you as a company and you as a person when you're not in the room is so powerful in itself and possibly slightly underrated. Is that one of the things, the importance of that led to the integrity of not only you individually, but of the Dandara brand?
There's a point there to wrap it into it is the fact that some people just don't think about it.
Yeah.
And when, I'm not saying that about every minute of every day, but when there's big decisions to be made, I don't know, staff restructuring, different marketing campaigns, tone of voice, HR policies, everything you do has an impact. Hopefully what I'm quite good at, looking at the big picture, but also then being able to come down to the granular level to understand, okay, well, nuts and bolts of how that works are like this, and it could have one of these three impacts in the wider picture, and then making an informed decision based off that. Because there's a hell of a lot of people out there that, I don't know, the frontline staff might have no flexibility to do anything. And they're very rigid with their standard operating procedure, perhaps, which is fine. It's a regulated industry. You do need to make sure certain things are done in certain ways, but not allowing staff to have autonomy or not allowing staff on the ground to not be robots. When you think about forcing somebody to follow a process to the letter, a lot of the time they're not thinking about the impact of, no one wants to deal with a computer. No one wants to deal with somebody that says, oh, I have to speak to my manager. So a lot of what we have done and what we continue to do is, how do you empower the teams to effectively just do first-time fix or be able to solve problems for people? When we're doing the customer experience, tone of voice, the way we answer the phone, the way we greet people, and curating that experience, I remember the experience director giving me a call to say, right, okay, well, we rolled it out, but I've just done a mystery shop in Manchester, and they've answered, I've gone in to do a viewing, and they've asked if I wanted a brew. I was like, right, okay, what's the issue? When in the standard operating procedure, it's, would you like a drink? I'm like, it's Manchester, a brew's fine. So actually then the point being is, and what I've come to realise is, the framework is probably, and again, all statistics are wrong, but 80% of what they have to do. The 20% is the personnel. Another one, and I use this as an example all the time, but we've got one of our members of staff in Manchester who is quite senior on site, let's say. For a period of time, she used to ring one of our students at 8:30 every morning to wake her up for university because she promised her mum that she wouldn't let her miss university. So I'm left in this situation where I've got somebody that earns a good living in terms of one of our senior members of staff doing the smallest admin task on site and thinking, how can I engineer out the fact that she comes off task? And the other side of me absolutely loves it because it's the heart of the person.
Yeah.
I can't make her want to do that. That's who she is, and that's why she's fantastic in that role. So that 80-20, if effectively the rule was you can't do that, you'd miss something.
Lectures would be full to the brim if everyone got a wake-up call in the morning to get them.
That's
We're
only
on to
one.
something here. It's genius.
Maybe it's a service. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So let's jump on to 2 truths, 1 lie. So this one is a bit more focused on customer retention and reviews. So the first statement is...
And this is teamwork, right?
Correct.
This is the
I'll bring
team.
you in it together.
The dream teamwork. So, close to 90% of consumers trust online reviews as much as personal recommendations. That's statement number 1. Statement number 2 is acquiring a new customer can cost 5 times more than retaining an existing customer. And point number 3 is American Express found 33% of customers will consider switching companies after just one instance of poor customer service.
I think they could all be true or they could all be false, to be fair, because you've got different ways of acquiring customers, cost spend. my view, the first two true, probably.
As a person, a personal recommendation normally comes from someone relatively trustworthy. Online reviews have in the past come under scrutiny when you've got obviously owners of businesses writing their own.
I think that's the difference, though, in build to rent. Obviously, it was a case of a London restaurant that never actually existed getting to number one on TripAdvisor, right?
Oh, yeah.
But so
Yeah,
that's
classic.
when you look at reviews, can you trust it? I don't know, when we go on holiday or what have you. The other stat is 70% of people, and these are all wrong and made up anyway, but Google something or research something before they make a purchase decision. So we're very aware of that as well. But in build to rent and in the built environment now, we have home views, which is a really good metric for us in our business. You can't cheat it.
Yeah.
It's as scary as it's exciting because they write to your residents and ask what they think. So you never know what people think until you ask them. Don't be scared of what they think. It's effectively what can you do on the stuff that isn't good to make it better, and the good stuff, double down on it. So going back to the reviews and the actual question is, that's huge for us. If it's a home views thing that effectively is kind of bona fide, a registered tenant, because they do check that they're a tenant in your building, to me that might carry the same weight.
No, agreed. I think you're right. If you get some form of regulation and credibility attached to it, then that obviously massively helps out. In general, the online world is obviously a very big place, and once you get that credibility, then I would believe the 90% stat. Switching customers, a one bad experience, people can be quite reactionary.
We've all done it as well.
You
have that one? You go, never again.
Especially if it happens early. If it happens early on, then obviously that can get you.
And I think touching on that, actually, one thing that we've found from looking at the data, our residents, when they move in, and on the whole, they rate us quite highly, which is great. But what I found is that people that move in and within the first, 48, 72 hours have an issue, but a small issue, that we rectify quickly, rate us more highly than people that never have an issue. Yeah. Which is bonkers, really, because they've had a situation.
It makes sense, though, because they've put it into practice.
Yeah, they have. And again, it's different in build to rent, and if you're at a certain quantum, because you can get the staff on site, you can be reactive. It's not back in my agency days, 5 days to fix your tap, because you have to wait for a contractor and you have to wait for the landlord to sign it off. So for us, the cynical side of me, and to be clear, we don't do this, is how about we engineer a small issue in? Of course we don't, but the cynical side of people would probably say, well, if that's the formula that works, why not double down on it? But again, we're just nice to see the guys know that effectively that is a thing. So they'll be even more focused on the day 1, day 2, day 3 experience. And we have a full curated experience through the first week anyway. So
it goes back to a bit of human psychology almost as well, in that the people who haven't had the issue, they might actually have a small issue. They just haven't made you guys aware of it. And it's sitting there in the background. And it's slightly annoying.
Undetected.
Yeah.
That's the trickiest one, is that bit when you go back to the invisible reputation that we were mentioning earlier, that, you've moved into an apartment, your friend says, how was it? That's okay, because the skirting board was dusty, or I didn't know how to work the extractor hood or something like that. That happens. It's not a complaint, so they don't feel compelled to tell you. They've probably, and this will change in the future, they've probably got low expectations of renting, if I'm honest, from coming through buy-to-let landlords. Some are fantastic, some aren't so good, some agencies are good, some aren't so good. So the way that we engineer it is, they move in, we do a check-in after 24, 48 hours, and another one after the first week that they've been in, just to wrap it. So we're effectively saying, do you have anything you need to make us aware of? It's not a complaint, but they said, actually, while you're on, the tap is leaking. Okay, we'll be up in 15 minutes, because we can be. So it's understanding the pain points, and what you've both said there, that's something that I knew was an issue in the industry. So why not just ask them if everything's okay? Because they'll tell you if you ask them most of the time, but they wouldn't probably think, I don't want to put them out, or, it's fine, we'll just deal with it. What that then translates to is the same conversation around, it was okay, was, I'll tell you what, they asked me if everything was okay. And they were there 15 minutes later. Fantastic. Yeah. So that net promoter score element of it, the visible reputation of the brand, all gets better just from one conversation.
I suppose as well, from your perspective, you'd rather be given the opportunity to make it right rather than knowing it was wrong the whole time. So, drum roll please, I'm joking. The lie is, acquiring a new customer can cost 5 times more than retaining an existing customer. And the reason why that is a lie is because it's very difficult to measure the relative cost of acquisition versus retention, and that it varies a lot industry to industry. So that's too general a statement
You're right.
to brush over on this one. But that is really interesting, what you were saying about I know that Alex wanted to ask a bit more of this.
Obviously, I had a cheeky look at your home view scores, and it's startlingly high. And it'd be interesting to understand, one, I expect how important your staffing are in terms of the day-to-day contact with customers, and how you've really focused in on building up such a strong score. 'Cause last time I checked, it was north of 98% for the top 2, and yet about 96% for the top 1 in terms of reviews, which is amazing.
We've done really well, and I say it's the site staff. The different parts of the business contribute differently. So you've got hours and days and days and days 5 years ago of post-it notes on walls with me and the guys that were there kind of when we started the company, curating hopefully what was quite a good customer journey, day one experience. Through the years, we've had various people input into that. So that's all that really we can do by way of setting a process, setting a procedure, and giving the framework to the guys on the ground. Because we're not there. It's not us that are the characters. It's not us that people really get to know and value their opinions and ask how their dogs are and all that good stuff. So the process, as I've said earlier, probably that 80-20 piece really. So you've got a process that they work through the framework. So how do we surprise and delight people through the journeys? And that's something that we can engineer, something that we can budget, it's something that we can research, something that we can try, it's something that we can change. And then the other side of it is getting the right people actually that are having those interactions on a day-to-day basis. And that's where build to rent at scale really does differentiate. I remember back to the 20-year-old Paul Borrmann doing a move in agency. Not that I slung the keys across the table, but it's nothing like what we're doing today in build to rent. How you get the right guys on the ground is something we focus on quite early. So we have in-house talent management. So we do all our own recruitment, and we have done since day one. We might use a recruiter now and again for a senior hire if it's a specialty, but our internal team know exactly what we want. They know the culture. They effectively can headhunt. They can effectively sift through CVs for background. They can look at certain histories or certain experiences that we need. The interview process, again, is something that we looked at in terms of for each role. Is it a 1-stage? Is it a 2-stage? Is it questions, Q&A? Is it then casework on the second one where they can play a role together or what have you? So for each role, we have different ways of interviewing. We have different interview questions. So that element is the framework, the structure, and the questions that we have are anchored around our core values, core beliefs, and our mission statement. So the aim of it is finding the right person. We're looking at our company and looking at our staff to say, what do we actually love about our guys? Because that's, for some reason, it's working. And I do look back 5 years ago and it was just me starting Dandara Living. Fast forward to 100 staff that we have now. There isn't one piece of advice or one bit of secret sauce that's made it happen. There's too many things. But finding the right staff, them creating the culture themselves, us saying, we love that culture, let's do more of that. And then effectively making them accountable for, don't ruin it. Don't let that next person come in that's going to take away from that. And I'm sure there's a couple of expletives I use in that motivational talk with them because I'm so proud of what the guys do on the ground. And the other side of it is fail fast. And as hard as it is to say, if we do recruit the wrong person or if they've got the wrong attitude or they've got the wrong focus, then I fully back the team to, within a probation period, then if it's not right for them and it's not right for us, it's not going to be a long-term relationship. So for us, hopefully we're quite transparent about what we need and demand from somebody. And it's not our Netflix dossier or anything like that, but we do want people that are normal people that can understand and relate to our residents. And again, when you think about where we've got people from, so broad. From in Manchester, we've got an ex-Disney person that's our customer experience lead over there. We've got people that ex-Costa Starbucks, they train really well, customer service is really good. So in terms of then you get to actually the strategy about for each role, which sectors you go to effectively find good people that transition of transferable skills. So one of the things we do quite well is just that big picture in terms of what impact might this element of recruitment, let's say, have an impact on our business, and then get to that real granular bit around how do we interview, how do we source people, and then putting those two together hopefully gets quite a good thing. And we've made loads of mistakes. That's another thing you learn from mistakes as well. So keep doing the stuff that works and quite quickly stop stuff that doesn't work.
It's quite interesting you say about empowering the individual, effectively what you're saying, and giving that ownership to all members of staff and making them believe in the vision. Because if you've got everyone working towards one thing, then obviously you can raise your standards and reach those loftier goals.
It's always that strive for, not that it isn't enough, but there's always something more you could be doing. It's finding that balance between giving autonomy to people whilst keeping them within a framework. And it's a forever thing that we're wrestling with in terms of how far is too far. And we'll continue to play with that as we go along. So hiring the right people and let them get on with it.
I love that you've got the customer experience from Disney. But that is brilliant because it's not just looking within the framework of BTR in order to find people, but looking broader and thinking how can we go into brands with incredible customer experience and use that in a different way, but to inject some difference, excitement, innovation within our brand. And that's one way of doing that really effectively.
I think one thing, and you mentioned about the difference between the agency sector and build to rent, and I do believe it's a lot more collaborative because it's still quite new. There's only, 15, 20, 30 decent operators. We're all on the UK AA's panel anyway, so we all talk and we all know each other. And it's idea sharing as well. So I remember probably 4 years ago speaking to Lee Hill over at Greengate in Manchester, and 2 of his concierge people were from Butlins. I've never even thought about recruiting from Butlins, but when you think about what Butlins are, they do accommodation, they do customer service. They've got the jazz hands. Fantastic. So I'm the first person to say I don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of good ideas out there from people. You don't always have to be the cleverest person in the room and just leverage other people's learnings. Again, in Birmingham, we've got the assistant manager running countrywide for Birmingham and the Midlands. But before that, he was 18 to 30s. And he hates talking about it, but that's a really good thing. So he can coerce, manage, lead big groups of people, get people to buy into ticket sales, all these transferable skills, which he probably thinks he's forgotten, and he'll hate the fact that I've said it on the pod. But it makes him the person he is. And when historically I've perhaps looked at the last 2 roles of somebody's CV, I'm very much these days looking at them ones that you're almost thinking about dropping off your CV when you used to work in that fish and chip shop in 2001 or something. Everything gets to forming you as the person you are. I did Halfords part-time, so I sold, as it was, subwoofers and 6x9s at the time. So that was the sales element that I learned. Customer service, I used to be a football coach and a children activity leader when I was like 15, dressing up as a tiger with birthday cakes. So I've done that element as well. And there's parts of that I don't dress up as a tiger so much these days, but they form you as a person. So it's all important about where somebody's come from to kind of predict where they're going.
Yeah, and getting, I suppose, that injection of new and fresh perspective as well. And then how important would you say branding and marketing is for your PTR properties?
It's hard because the obvious answer is brand is really important. When we think about, you mentioned Disney there, when you say Disney, you already know certain things about it. The industry is, that question has been asked for the last maybe 5 years in build trend, and the answer normally is brand is really important. It's going to become more important, and I don't think that answer changes. As we go through, people are understanding that there's a difference. So the first thing is, what is build to rent? Do the customers still like that? Do they actually know what that term is? Rightmove have done a bit with that, so you can differentiate between normal and stuff with amenities. As soon as the consumer understands that there's a fundamental difference, and then you get the feedback, you get the reviews and what have you, that becomes something that might be something you recommend to a friend. And that's when the brand kicks in, because when they go to look at you, what do they see? Does it appeal to them? We've been through a rebrand recently, just in the process of rolling it out at the moment. So 5 years ago, our idea, which was the same as most build-to-rent operators, was, it's like living in a hotel. Build-to-rent is great. And then we got to thinking, who wants to live in a hotel? Like, you don't actively want to live in a hotel. So our new brand is a lot more subtle, a lot more laid back, a lot more homely. You can tell on our Rightmove adverts now, it's not pristine show apartments with really, really bright lighting, which has always been right, and it's not wrong now. But it's an unmained bed, it's cooked chicken on the side, it's trying to, the M&S of property advertising maybe, that you can see yourself in, it's that emotive sell as well. Trying not to fall into the list of the war of amenities, because that's the way that America has gone. So, we've got a bowling lane, we've got laser tag. We're not getting into that. We're getting into really good, well-managed properties that have the amenities that matter, that move the dial. And we're probably not even going to put them as bullet points on the website. It's not about that. It's about, this is Dandara Living. This is how it feels to live in a Dandara Living property. And what we'd rather do is somebody move in and effectively be surprised, well, actually, it's better than I thought, rather than somebody going either it's worse than I thought or, it's exactly like I thought.
I like what you say about the M&S of marketing.
I don't know how my marketing team will go down on that.
Yeah, but no, when you think of what they bring, which is that homely feel, you are right. There's operators out there who are doing things slightly differently. Whether that's right or wrong is the market will decide over time. But
and that's it. We're not, because we can be quite nimble. We think it's the right thing to do, not just because it's different, just our brand isn't the brand just because that's what we think. We think that brand actually is just what people might want in the market, and it'd be a refreshing change. And we might do a podcast next year, the year after, and see how that's gone. But at the moment, we're sitting at 98, 99% occupancy, decent rental growth and what have you as we go through. Customer satisfaction scores are quite good. So all the metrics that we measure are reinforcing that we're doing something right. And again, it's not one thing, it's probably all these things. And the obsession over trying to do 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 things that all impact 1%, rather than one showstopper, which doesn't really exist.
As well, like what you said about having people be pleasantly surprised by things, or they feel like they can come downstairs and there's that like personal touch. That's, in a way, an inversion of a lot of the way that people market, which is a lot of the singing and dancing. And then when it comes to actually showing it, well, you've already got them at that point. You don't need to impress them and all of that type of thing. That is so integral to creating a long-term brand that people trust and want to come back to. And that's actually, funnily enough, when we were speaking to Adam Brockley of Scape a few weeks ago, echoed a lot of what he said was, we're actually really careful about the statements that we make because we've got to be delivering on every single one of those promises. And the last thing we want to do is make some grandiose statement that actually we can't come through on, and that does more damage to us than good. That thought line that you're obviously following as well yourselves and have established yourselves, which is, let's make people impressed without shouting about it, and therefore you gain their trust and you become reliable for them. And then in terms of technology, I can imagine that that's changed somewhat since the beginning and the evolution of that. How are you using technology and AI and things like that to optimize operations?
It's a buzzword at the moment, right? So with the operations at the moment, all the costs are going up for investors on the OPEX. Obviously, you've got staffing, you've got energy bills and what have you. So there's a real focus on how can you do more with less, or how can you do more with the same and find your efficiencies there. Things like lettings and the property management side of it, using AI kind of with your chatbots to automate. If we have which we do, it's 50, 60,000 word standard operating procedure, you can, with AI, teach a computer how your business runs. So rather than effectively a person on front desk either having to remember that or having to use a reference guide, a chatbot could effectively answer any question based on company view rather than those chatbots that we've all used, I'm sure, that aren't particularly helpful. So from that point of view, it can then take the issues, it can problem solve on a repairs reporting front. It can then effectively raise works orders, put it through the process, all the bits that are manual at the moment, certain bits that don't need to be manual for customer touch points, can be automated, and the use case is still being proven, but we're in conversations about that. Some of the more exciting and funny uses for it, we are talking to an intelligent building group around AI and CCTV, 2 use cases there. So one is in Leeds, we have some lovely grass areas inside our developments on the podiums, which are fantastic for the summer. We do concerts for the guys to come watch on the balconies and what have you. We do sporting events and things like that. But people have got pets because we're a pet-friendly operator. And whilst you would hope they don't let the dogs wee or poo on the grass, perhaps they do sometimes. So that causes an issue because we have to manage that. Now, very hard to manage because you can't find out. So from working with AI suppliers, we've come up with ways that the CCTV in the estates area can be taught to look for somebody walking a dog making a squat position, which is akin to a poo, having a poo, and the owner not bending down into a certain position to pick it up. And if it does, take a picture and email it to the front desk. So we know exactly who it is that's had the offending animal. It's bonkers.
I love it.
But again, that granular nature, I'm a bit of a geek, really appeals to me going, okay, so big picture, small picture. That would mean that we no longer have an issue because that can solve that for us. People can be held accountable. And the big picture is everyone gets their grass back, which is fantastic. And it's nice to sit on and enjoy. So there's use cases like that. There's operational ones around current need to, and we're still going through this, but go round gyms, maybe every 30 minutes, every hour from a compliance point of view, just make sure people haven't, because they're unmanned gyms, whilst they're under CCTV and nobody's fallen off a treadmill, nobody's got in some trouble. Whereas you can teach AI to effectively alert you for noise, alert you for somebody that's not making any movements. There's a whole host of stuff that effectively then you don't need the operational team to be going around that space because it's exception reporting and it will notify you when there's a problem. So again, I'm still getting my head around it. Our team is still getting their head around it, but the applications are going to be big in the next couple of years. It just takes a few people to make a few strides, and then that'll be adopted in the industry for sure.
That's fantastic. And I think so unique the way that you can use these things. And
it's bonkers.
We haven't really touched the surface or scratched the surface of where it can really go and how it can help move things forward. So it's really exciting to see how that will all unfold.
There'll be companies that do it for doing its sake, and there'll be companies that effectively really make operational improvements because of it. It's gimmicky at the moment, but it'll be proven a use case for core things in the not too distant future.
Focusing in on future as well, it'd be great to hear what Dandara's current growth plans, what growth milestones you've set. Is there more emphasis on forward funding, or what's the plan?
So again, there's various different functions to the Dandara Living business. So at the start, we are a land team. So we source the land ourselves, design the schemes, we develop the schemes out. That's Dandara Living development. Dandara Living construction is the construction business. So we build out the schemes, and then Dandara Living management be the operator on the back end of which I oversee. There's a misconception in the industry that we're trying to change it. Dandara build for Dandara. So effectively, of the assets that we have live at the moment, we manage 5 assets on behalf of investors. So I think that the first thing is that we're a manager. We do manage internally, but we can manage externally as well at scale in England, in Scotland. The growth plans, I guess, we have a pipeline of around 7,000 units coming through, effectively the build process. So we're busy on that side in terms of building stock to come through the process. And the focus for the next 6, 12, 18 months then is what we've managed and what we've seen is, and we mentioned it earlier, building our platform and making sure that we probably don't shout about it enough until it's ready to go out into the wider world. So that's where the future lives, taking that in as well as our internal pipeline coming through, which internally we're looking at the 7,000 plus 3,000 or 4,000 extra units over the next couple of years, getting us to in and around 15,000 units in management, which is a big ask, but we've got the platform now ready to go. There's lots of investors in the market that effectively are looking for somebody they can trust to operate their assets. So where we are now, we have done co-living. We've got student elements to some of our assets. We've got build to rent. We've obviously got the housing development. So with Dandara, we have house building divisions as well. And we're a national house builder. So we're still looking for that deal where somebody buys it who isn't an operator. And obviously we will then be able to launch our single family housing brand as well. So exciting times, really. It's been hard work and getting ready to pivot and the different things that we need from a reporting standpoint, but we're ready to go. We're, like I say, it's a tech-enabled platform. It's managing property, whether it's a student asset, whether it's a build-to-rent asset or a single-family housing asset. So that's the next year and a half, us concentrating on that and really being able to supply that to people that are asking for it at a time where hopefully we've embedded our brand in the market and we can be trusted. And the results that we have already achieved for our investors that we have on the books, and hopefully talk for themselves and give clarity on, yes, we are external managers as well as internal managers. And if you do need somebody, whether it be consultation, whether it be mobilization, or whether it be asset management in the middle, then we can do it. So it'd be worth having a talk about it. So that's the immediate future, focusing on technology, getting efficiencies, everything else that comes with growth is stuff we'll continue with. What comes with that in terms of the risks associated with any opportunity is we're quite keen not to grow too fast. I've seen that happen a few times where people invest a lot of time in business development and what have you, or service a client base that's maybe too big for them too early on. We can take scale portfolios on. Like I say, we have 1,000 units in Manchester, which is one of the biggest assets in the UK, and it's performing very well. But would we take on 50 different investors with 100 different schemes over the next 6 months? Probably not. So for us, it's trying to find investors that have got aligned visions, aligned values and beliefs, really. There are investors out there that are into buying assets, grouping them, stabilizing them, flipping them, which is absolutely fine. That's a business model. From a moral and a company culture standpoint, it's quite hard to get what we want to do on those schemes because maybe the game isn't a 15, 20-year hold. And it isn't to really delight and excite the resident and be able to get the rents that come back with that. So for us, it's trying to find that sweet spot behind going for other opportunities in the market. Also finding people that are aligned on our values, because an investor and an operator have to be hand in hand. There's no way that they can kind of not be on the same page and have a fruitful and a long-lasting relationship. So that's one of the key things. And to date, the investors that we've spoken to, we've been quite lucky, actually, that we're really, really aligned on what we do. And we're quite open and transparent about what we'd like to achieve in the industry and how we'd like to go about it.
Interesting what you say about being aligned with the investors. Could you just expand potentially on Dandara look for in their counterparties, whether that be working on the management side of things as a manager, or alternatively also potentially when you're praising a third-party investor coming in on a forward funding basis?
So again, the investors that we've spoken to, there are investors out there that their business is making money from property. There's also investors out there that effectively, whilst they want to make money from property, want to do it in what I believe to be the right way, the ethical way. They want to invest in an operator that doubles down on ESG, that looks at the customer experience, that looks at the product, that looks at the way that the asset's maintained for the long term. So for us, Assets that are held with the intention of long-term holds or even mid-term holds is obviously fine. Because what comes with that is if their aim is to own it for the long term, they have to look after it. And looking after it means looking after residents, looking after the building, looking after everything in between. So for us, we would probably struggle to work with people that just wanted a fast buck, if I'm honest. But at the same time, people that are really in it for the long term and to do it correct, we'd love to work with them.
So now we're going to jump into our other 2 truths, 1 lie. First statement is, as of 2022, 49% of the population in the UK rented. Second statement is, a study of 1,000 renters in the UK showed 83.82% of renters in the UK want to own a property. And then the third statement is, there are currently 49,500 build-to-rent homes under construction in the UK, along with 119,300 in the pipeline.
How specific. It's an over and under game, that one. My view would be the second one would probably be the false one, only because the numbers are quite hard to understand which one is actually true. But I do think the shift of it may have been that high. There is a fundamental change in the renting landscape and people's belief around home ownership. There's still your home as your castle is fundamentally there, and people would love to aspire to it. But there's also the people that have come through now that want that transient nature, that bricks and mortar and mortgage do tie you down, and it is tricky to move, and the flexibility that you do get from renting assets. I don't know about the percentage, but I'd guess that's growing. And whether or not that's 20% or higher, I'm guessing it's higher.
What do we reckon on the lie?
I'm sticking with number 2.
Both of you are wrong.
Oh,
As of
How boring would it be if we were both right all the
Yeah.
time?
literally, keep it interesting. As of 2022, 49% of the population in the UK rented is a lie. It's actually less than that. In 2022, it was 35.7%. Okay, perfect. Let's jump on to market insights.
so yeah, it's just touching on some of the market insights. The operational challenges, obviously, in build to rent have been documented, but the operational challenges in all real estate is also been well documented. I'm just wondering how Dandara are approaching the current economic climate and what you're doing to manage your operational costs, and if there's any specific ones where you found some success.
It's an ongoing thing. Every single time we look at a scheme, how efficient can it be? So probably about 2 months ago, we had a group of operational staff, some of our housekeepers, some of our leasing team, technician team, the customer service team, to take a real broad sample of people that are on our sites and actually run them on a day-to-day basis. We ran through what are their challenges to do with white goods, what are the challenges to do with building design. So that's fantastic, especially during COVID. That really helped us out with resident choice. But what that also means is then the residents can clean their own balcony windows. So that then isn't a cost on the OPEX. So we try to engineer out cost where we can for an investor when it comes, because obviously we can then reflect that on the gross to net, which helps us sell, hopefully for a higher figure, but also then passes over to the investor at a lower operational cost. But the biggest one that we always have on all of our schemes is staffing. And the staffing normally accounts for 30, 40, 50%, depending on the size and quantum of the scheme. So centralising certain aspects that we've gone through over the last few years to allow, rather than now needing, for instance, when we launched Manchester, we had a leasing team of 4 on site. Today, we perhaps have one person on there that does the viewing. And then you get into the tech, you get into efficiencies from there. So staffing is trying to find that middle ground where effectively don't carve it down too much that you lose the service and you lose the ability to do all the good stuff that we do, but that you don't have capacity on site that isn't being fully utilised. So we've been through quite a lot of job descriptions over the years, and when we have the opportunity to rescope and redesign job opportunities and job descriptions that we do that's the biggest thing that moves the dial on an operational cost. The other side of it is the true thing that moves the dial the most is how much you can get on the rents. So it comes back to the invisible reputation, it comes back to your product, it comes back to the brand. If you can make £10 extra, £20 extra per month on an apartment, not by topping out the market, and just to say that the Dandara Living product isn't a top of market spec, we think and we believe that our build product is top of middle for the mass market, because we think that's the biggest quantum of people that are renting in the UK. So there's 2 sides. So one is engineering the CapEx on day one, but also keeping an eye on that building, whether it be the white goods, whether it be the mechanics of the building, the M&E system, that it doesn't hurt an investor through the life, because there is a fair amount of build to rent stock in the market that is build for sale stock that actually is now just build to rent. That wasn't designed the way that we designed the stock. thinking about, okay, 50-year ownership and 2 or 3 life cycles of replacement. So that's not USP because there's a few people in a similar world to us, but that's something that we really double down in, trying to control the asset. So my aim is when we put an operational expenditure budget in front of an investor, it's close, if not there. Whereas a lot of the budgets that I see and that come across my desk for review from other companies or what have you, they might just say it's 2% for that. Whereas we like to kill with granularity and we'll go into, well, actually, I don't know, the site scent, it's the Dandara Living scent, costs £85 a month. And that's what's going to be in your budget rather than just saying customer experience activities 2%. There's lots of operators out there that perhaps buy a scheme and would love to do anything to be able to affect the build, but it's too late. So this will come through in the market that a Dandara Living, now with my construction hat on, a Dandara Living building is different to any other building in the market. Not saying it's better than every building in the market, but it's a thoroughly thought through product ready for operation rather than a block of flats that you can buy and manage. So it comes at it from lots of different ways to try and get that benefit for the investor.
That's super interesting. I mean, you guys under your portfolio also, you've got a 995 unit scheme, you've got a 324 unit scheme. Do you find there's been economies of scale as you go to larger?
It definitely is. The clearest example is probably the difference between our Leeds and our Manchester scheme. So we've got 744 units in Leeds, 995 in Manchester. So let's just say it's 250 kind of different. We've got the same staffing structure between the two. So the staffing budgets are the same, but we're managing 250 extra properties. When you look at, say, Birmingham, the 324 scheme, that's a different staffing structure because 300 is fundamentally different than a bigger scheme. We think that once you get over 500, maybe 600, that staffing structure can take you as high as people want to build these days. If you get over your 1,000, 1,200, you probably need to look again, depending on how the site's laid out. But we 100%, and that as a direct knock-on to gross to net can be percentage points. So it's not that we all need to build monsters, but there's definitely stuff you can do on bigger schemes to play within the OPEX to get to a place that's really effective. And then the other side, we've got 164 units, as I mentioned earlier, that's piecing in Birmingham. Hopefully next week. On that, it's a totally different staffing structure because they're predominantly one beds, so the income against it, balanced against the OPEX, effectively, not that you can't afford a 24-hour operation, but does it need it? Does it need a gym? And a whole host of things come into the different proposition at different scales. Over the years, and because we've managed big, we've managed small, we've managed Scotland, we've managed England, we've got per quantum of apartments staffing structures that you'd effectively need to manage them. So going back to effectively the external management, we can very quickly turn around operational budgets once we have asset registers and once we have GA plans and what have you. So lots to think about, but you definitely get economies of scale. At some point, you can't afford to do the stuff you want to do. That's what you have to get used to. But when you build big enough and when you have a certain quantum, you can really affect the journey with how much money you can use to focus on the customer.
Just going back to a little bit of in terms of your operational costs and your management building as well. How much are you at Dandara Living using data analysis at the moment? And is there any really particularly interesting insights that have come out of that exercise at the minute in terms of bringing further efficiencies to the developments?
The biggest thing at the moment is systems, the processes. Are they manual? Are they not manual? Can you automate? Can you not automate? We've been quite lucky when I started the business 5 years ago that it was just a plain sheet of paper. So coming out of Granger, who'd been going for 100 years, very different way of working. They have lots and lots of different business functions that have to be thought of. A fresh blank of paper allowed us to plan from day one what we would like. So whether it be the tech stack that we work with, whether it be the efficiency that we get through the leasing teams, whether it be automating the repairs and maintenance journey via the app that we use, there's lots of stuff that we designed in from day one and then obsess over what can you do different and what get better on. It's sometimes hard to put a pure impact against budget because A, we think perhaps it's the right thing to do for customer experience, and B, we haven't run it any other way, so we don't know kind of what the impact is. But as an example, the technicians that we have on site, and we do warranty works, planned preventive maintenance, reactive maintenance. We do everything in-house on site, bar life systems, so your lifts, your smoke extract and what have you. Through that and through the tech stack that we have for repairs and maintenance and PPM, one, we have a live figure on what the compliance of the building is. Number two, the technicians are almost like Uber drivers in our scheme because they don't need to come back to get a works order. It gets reported through our portal. It goes straight up to the technician who manages it directly. They arrange access directly through the app from their mobile phone. The jobs are scheduled, so straight away you're on to the next job. So we can now do PPM, planned preventive maintenance, and repairs and maintenance with less people than if we did have that system in place, which then knocks onto the OPEX and knocks onto the gross to net as well. There's not one thing that solves the problem, but there's lots of component parts that when you put them together make quite a sizable impact.
Obviously very well documented in the wider rental market. Rental growth has been exceptionally strong across the UK over the last 12, 15 months in particular. How have you found rental growth been with your particular developments, and have certain geographies fared better than others?
It's an interesting one. I think all geographies are doing really well at the moment. I don't think it's a surprise to say anybody that's working in the letting side of things, not that they've got an easy ride, but it's easier than it has been because the supply and demand is so much in our favour. If you're good at it, you can make real bounds forward on it. So the aim of that to be focusing on attraction and retention really hard at the start. And not that we've lessened it up, but effectively now we're realising the market rents. A massive difference between where they are. And like I say, we're sitting at 98, 99% occupancy in Manchester. So it's half a, and I hate it when I say it, that we say, oh, perhaps we're too cheap over at 99% when they've worked really hard to get it there. So there's that. There's our scheme in Aberdeen called The Point. That's a builds inclusive scheme that we have there. We run serviced apartments in there. We run PRT, open market tenancies, and student tenancies. So that one's a trickier one, if I'm honest, to sell just the narrative of it, because what you've got there is a build inclusive element where people don't understand, perhaps on the face of it, how much builds cost. So because you've wrapped it up as an inclusive element, there's a little bit more explaining to do. But because we've got CHP units in the plant room there, it's actually quite an efficient way of making the electricity. So the price that we can pass it on to the residents is cheaper than they would be able to do themselves. But there's a little bit of a game and a little bit of an explanation to get people to understand that, because they don't trust the letting agent sometimes. So changing that narrative, but that's where it has been historically. So rents are really healthy. I sit in Altrincham probably 2-3 days a week, our head office, and I can hear new business teams sitting next to me. It's upsetting because I would say, not every other, but more frequently that I would like is us providing really nice customer service, saying that we don't have availability. And that's really difficult. So do we turn Rightmove off because we don't need to get the calls, but then we do have the pipeline coming through? So we sit here in August speaking to Birmingham, the earliest availability is November now. So that particular portfolio of 2,000 units, they were letting that far ahead with a growth of 7 to 8% at an occupancy of 98, 99%. It's going quite well. And then the retention piece, when we're contacting people at renewal or at the end of their tenancy, that the aim there is that when that conversation comes up, that they're happy with the rent increase. No one's ever happy, but they're accepting because the service they've had is hopefully quite good. And also everyone would do this. You'd check the market and they would find actually the market is a little bit bonkers at the moment, but we're not one of these people that really want to go top and really drive occupancy down to churn. We'd much rather play that middle game where you're keeping your existing tenants at a decent level, whilst then realising the market rent on a certain quantum of churn.
It's interesting you're saying that there's a lot of the times the new business team are having to say that there's no space. That brings us on to the whole supply fundamentals in build to rent. What do you see as some of the key issues that need to be addressed within the build to rent sector in order to enable it to thrive as an asset class and for that supply to really come through?
It's been the same for a long time, but we had a scheme in Didsbury that we were trying to work through. We said to the councillors, just talk to us. And it's engaging early with the local authorities, listening to their concerns, because a lot of them it's just change management. No one really likes change. And actually I said, would you mind having a chat? And I said, we haven't paid him, but effectively what is it like living here as not a 20-year-old? And the council went away from that meeting, perhaps with different preconceived ideas to what they thought before they joined. So there's engaging early, there's talking to them, there's not being bullish around we're the developer, we're here to do it. And the other side of it is that's when we speak to them. So we would like to do it anyway, but now ESG effectively is really forcing that forward as well, integrating with the local community. So creating jobs through the build, creating jobs through the commercial units that we have, on the commercial units that we have on our portfolio. Not that they're a loss leader, but we don't price them in a way that really means you need to get top value from a commercial asset, because it's, and one of our investors, we're talking yesterday about our asset in Leeds. We actually say, rather than spending the events budget externally or what have you, actually what we'll do is we'll funnel the events budget into the independent that we've got there on the Leeds site, which is great because he provides a fantastic service. And then also the money coming out of effectively the investor's pocket is going back into the circular economy on site. So there's a whole number of things, and councils being more comfortable with what build to rent is to allow development. And then just there's plenty of money trying to come into it.
Out of interest, you've got obviously the whole of the UK to go at the minute. Are there any key target geographies where you've identified as opportunities going forward? And obviously noticed that there's a lack of current ownership in London, albeit obviously there's pipeline there. Have you found London its own beast in terms of it's offering its own challenges?
It's easier to do stuff in the regions. That's where when we're thinking about, is it London or is it the regions where we start? So Dandara had got a footprint in developing PRS stock in Manchester, historically anyway. So that's something that's always been close to us, and we've had regional offices for as long as I can remember. The first cut was Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, and probably with the benefit of hindsight, it wasn't a bad 3 cities to launch in when you think about the growth in the regions. I always remember back, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago, when I was at Granger, we had Clippers Quay, which is 600 odd units. And at that time, we're thinking, that's Manchester done. We've got 600 units. It's really hot in Manchester. We then did another 375, which was on Chapel Street, and us having 1,000, and thinking, actually, it's not slowing down. Manchester's bonkers. Manchester's 99%. We haven't got enough properties to rent to people. So there is that bit where Manchester and Salford councils have been great bringing in commercial as well as residential, and that city will continue to grow. So for us, actually actively looking for sites in Manchester, which 5, 6, 7 years ago, I might have not believed. So they're proving themselves in terms of people that we've spoken to around our external business. We did some consultancy work for a fund that were looking to launch a development in Derby. Derby isn't probably the first place you think of for build to rent, but your Derbys, your Blackburns, your Boltons, there's a place. People need to rent. People need places to live. Again, back in my Granger days, we purchased the Rock portfolio in Bury, world famous markets, black pudding. But that was a asset that really, really performed well. As probably the best performing asset in the company at the time. The people of Bury, it was commutable to Manchester, very good value point compared to Manchester, and a real lack of quality accommodation to rent in that particular locality. So again, as the cities hot up, the suburbs around the cities increase and grow and benefit from the growth of the cities as well. So the first thing we normally look for, high student retention. Obviously, we'll do the same thing that everyone else does in terms of average earnings and what have you, but we're into Bristol, we're into Glasgow, we're into Edinburgh. We're still probably in those first choice cities, but some people are moving into those perhaps secondary or third locations and doing quite good jobs.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's really interesting what you say about Manchester and the fact that you're looking for active sites. Even 2-3 years ago, the investor sentiment was leaning towards the fact that it was a bit full for build to rent, and that's just been continually proven to completely not be the case. And occupancy is as good as it's ever been, and along with rental growth, as obviously we talked about earlier.
As bonkers as I remember back in the days, it was probably the Slate Yard with L&G and Greengate, Philsal Investment Management. They're probably 2 of the first out of the ground in Manchester. Fast forward, there's over 35 build to rent schemes in Manchester live, which is bonkers. And that was 5 years ago, maybe.
And it's fundamentally changed the landscape of how the town looks, actually, as well, isn't it? These build to rent schemes are large and they make a footprint, but I think on the positive, Manchester's been celebrated as a city which has had seen great growth and realised its potential over the last 5-10 years. And build to rent has been a big part of that, really. Going back to what you said as well, that they're looking at different geographies now, smaller towns which have good catchments, potentially larger cities, but even towns themselves which they're in need of good quality rental accommodation. Just, I think, final one to touch on the PTR Insights part. I'm really interested to know what the team are looking for when they're appraising new sites. Are there 3 key things that you put as your fundamentals at the minute?
I mean, that team would probably be better to advise, but just from conversations that we have with them. So it's looking through unit mix, what can you fit on the site? Because again, as we touched on earlier, that knocks onto the OPEX, knocks onto the gross to net. So is it that effectively you can only do a small scheme? And if you can, is that what investors are looking for? Or do they look for a certain quantum to make it work on an efficiencies basis? Is it, like we say, a secondary or third city or town, or is it a main city? But again, it comes back to the main bit in terms of, are the people going to be there? And what we found, again, going back to the student cities that have decent retention, that's the first place to start, because they normally turn into people that are on higher earnings or better average earning. The retention in Manchester is fantastic from the universities and people staying on, an example. What planning allows as well is kind of really important in terms of massing of the apartments. How many apartments can you get onto one site? Again, coming into the efficiencies. And then the other side of it is, what's the track record of that council for allowing things to be delivered? Because you can really spend months and months, if not years, with certain councils and never get there, or get there, but it's taking a hell of a long time. And what perhaps looked like a really fantastic deal. If you had known that on day one or thought about things slightly different, you might have invested somewhere else in the land.
And then it'd be great to hear how your learnings from some of your early BTR project ended up informing some of the decisions you've made to date, and how you use that to really hone in on scaling in the most efficient way.
I always think this, whenever anyone says, oh, that person's experienced, what it means is they've had more opportunity to learn, more exposure, and they've probably made more mistakes. And you learn from them and you don't do it the same the next time. Or you do it really well and you double down, and that's what you continue to do. The biggest learning that I've seen in the industry from looking at other sites, from looking at our own sites, from, say, an amenity point of view for resident interaction, and that resident interaction and satisfaction is all the stuff around retention, attraction, word of mouth, tone of voice about how they talk about us. Amenity spaces and curating the experience on site are really important. So perhaps when we are probably guilty of this at the start, is the bullet point way of doing amenities. So private dining room, dog park, this. And what we're doing is designing a box for something. So that one is for private dining. And whilst private dining is good, and actually we have really great success stories from engagements to weddings and all this kind of stuff that we've had in our spaces, our learning is to create spaces and not tag them, so to make them multi-use. So we have rooms and spaces now that can be used for a book club, but could also be used for a 21st birthday, or could be used for a mother's coffee morning. It isn't that one thing that perhaps it was early doors. Some other things, again, really, really small things. But if you're talking about a private dining room, which the concept is still very much something that people do like, the actual use of that, we probably made a mistake on one of our schemes where it was a private dining room with a door that closed on it. So when it was booked, fantastic, people loved it. But maybe the other 12, 15 hours of the day where it wasn't used, you wouldn't really go in because it's on a door and you didn't know if somebody was in it and you'd feel like you're encroaching. So the concept is right. The way that we designed the space was wrong. So effectively now what we tend to do is with those spaces, allow separation by concertina doors or by curtains or by glazed doors. So you don't feel like you're encroaching in something. It's just a space that can be open during the day when it's not booked, but when it's booked, it can then be restricted and cordoned off for somebody. So it's just the little tweaks like that that go through. The other side of it around staffing structures, staffing roles and responsibilities that, as we mentioned earlier, we're continuously looking at to say, is that person really engaged, or would they enjoy to do something different? In stable state and in lease up, there are different roles and different requirements that you need from them roles. So it's just staying abreast and always being hungry to keep up.
So where are the biggest opportunities and risks for Dandara in the BTR space moving forward?
Might have touched on it earlier. So the opportunities there in terms of the launch of our external management business is the exciting thing that we're going to in terms of the development side of our business and the construction side of the business. It's getting investors around the table. There was a shaky 6 months at the back end of last year, maybe, where is there a financial crisis? Is there not a financial crisis? Everyone would agree that the money's firmly coming back around the table. There's belief in the market again, and our portfolios are very much engaged with people looking to purchase. So again, you can't control that, but that's been something that's been the case for maybe 6 to 8 to 9 months over the last period. Other risks, again, we touched on us as an operational brand, overexposing ourselves that we really don't want to do. It's controlled growth with trusted and aligned partners. And the other side of it is when we think about risks, there's still a risk of buying, whilst we're talking about, say, Manchester as an example, there's still bits of Manchester that aren't proven. You still rent them because people have to, but in terms of would it see an increase in churn, would it not really realise the rental potential that you think it might? Just because Manchester's hot and Salford are hot, it doesn't mean that everywhere is. So there's still lots of due diligence to be done on the locations. There's still due diligence to be done on will the council allow you to mass in certain ways. So I think they're probably the ones that we're looking at, both opportunities and risks above what we discussed.
And then one question we love to end on with our guests is, in the nature of the podcast itself, Reinventing Real Estate, we'd love to ask you, if you could reinvent one thing about real estate, would it be?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? So I wouldn't lie, I've been thinking about this in my head for a while. So the one thing actually that is frustrating to me from an operational point of view, but also from my development hat and my construction hat on from the Dandara Living joint businesses, is and I'd be keen to get your view on this, the fabled 25% gross to net that everyone still uses now and also has been using for a long time. It's used for a rule of thumb for valuing assets, and also as and when operational budgets come out, it's used almost as a where are you against a scale of 25% of income versus your expenditure. It's something that I'm quite passionate about and engage with UKAA and Brendan on to maybe lead something on that particular front. But the easy way to look at it is we've got 995 units in the middle of Manchester. So they cost a certain quantum to run and they bring in a certain level of rent. If you move those 995 properties to Bury, which still a very lovely place, the costs are going to be very much similar, but your rent is going to be substantially different. So I find it very tricky to say, how can you always badge something with 25% gross to net when actually there's too many parameters in it? When you look at the operational budgets, some operators and some investors, have the gym equipment as a capital expense and it won't appear on the operational budgets. Other people have it as an operational lease, so therefore it will affect your gross to net. So there's just too many moving parts in an operational budget for it to ever to be, that's the figure that you need to aim for, especially in light of we've seen double, if not triple digit moves north on our energy costs. So even if it was right 5-10 years ago, it can't still be the same now because the operational expenditure has got up out of control. So that's probably the one thing that there needs to be a metric. And I agree, we need to talk about some benchmarking, and it's too much of a complex issue to solve overnight. There should be, and there can be, if people get together, different ways of benchmarking scale, different ways of benchmarking location, and what is an out of budget as well. I don't know how we solve it, but I'm more than happy to work through it.
No, I agree. I think it is arguably becoming a bit dated now, but it's the best that everyone's got at the minute. One of the key challenges in an emerging market is that when you've got developers and when you've got investors with information, and when things are emerging, knowledge is power. We're always going to have the growing pains that as the sector matures, those that are at the forefront of it are always going to be slightly reticent to give too much of their information and too much of their knowledge away, as happens in every single asset class. And probably the most easy comparator is student over the recent periods of time in real estate, is that eventually, obviously, the market wins and the visibility comes. But until that point, I do agree that there's something to be done there in terms of how we can get more accurate operational expenditure estimations in there. Will that come as we get more exposure in direct markets? So whether that be we are able to build a better picture up in specific geographies, and that therefore will able to then give us some form of indices benchmark, and you'll be able to look at maybe a Derby against a Bury or something like that. But again, we just need probably a little bit more time for the data to come through.
No, I'd agree. I touched on earlier the whole data sharing. Obviously, over in the States, YieldStar is a huge thing in terms of the pricing algorithm software. Here, we've used YieldStar before on one of our assets. I don't think I know it's not bought into enough yet to be as powerful as it is in the States, but with the UKAA and effectively the narrative around data sharing and what have you that they're pushing, there's a willingness of the industry to get there. And that'll help everybody from people your side of the table through to people outside of the table as well.
Agreed.
Brilliant. So that brings us to a close. Paul, thank you so much for coming to speak to us on Reinventing Real Estate. It was so interesting to hear your incredibly humble approach that's ended up getting you where you are today, and keeping that integrity at the heart of everything you do, both personally and as Dandara as a brand, building that out with that at its core. Thank you so much for being here. So to wrap up, what the real key takeaways from this podcast are is that you don't have to have an established 10-year plan on where you're heading. Actually taking count of where you are at this moment in time and doing what you do really well and putting your heart and energy into it is really key. And also another key takeaway is that the people are behind the schemes that they run, and having those feedbacks from them enable them to create better buildings for people, better operational buildings for people, a better brand, and therefore have people continue returning to them. We really hope that you found everything really informative and liked all the content that you've seen so far. So if so, please subscribe. You can find snippets of the content on LinkedIn, but also the full content and episodes on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple. And we're already looking forward to seeing you next time, so stay tuned.